Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Welcome to the third session of palpation for physical therapists. Today we'll be discussing how to palpate spine and thorax. We'll start with the topographical views. On the anterior side, you can see the most prominent part in the midline is the jugular notch, the sternum, the pectoral region, the ribs, the cartilage margins, rectus abdominis, external oblique, umbilicus, iliac crest, and the inguinal ligament. On the dorsal aspect, we can see the spinous process, the vertebra prominence, then the medial border of scapula, inferior angle of the scapula, erector spinae group of muscles. These are a few muscles collectively called as erector spinae group of muscles. 12th rib, iliac crest, posterior superior iliac spine. Now there is a dimple which is also called as the sacral dimple in this region. So that is S2, and S2 and PSIS are just adjacent to each other. Sacrum and the spinous process of the thoracic and lumbar vertebrae. The first thing that you need to start working on is exploring the skin and fascia of any region that you want to palpate. In this picture, you're looking at how the therapist is trying to assess the skin and the fascia of the subject. The skin and the fascia are more mobile on the peripheral region, but as you come to the central region, it becomes more stagnant and it becomes more thick, because the spinous process has the supraspinous ligament, which is continuous with the subcutaneous tissue of the skin. In the side lying position, we can see the mobility, and we can feel for the mobility. The mobility is relatively good in both direction, either anterior or posterior. On the anterior aspect, on the abdominal wall, you can also find some mobility of the skin, and this will be more as compared to the posterior side. If you look at the bones of the spine and thorax, we can clearly see the spinous processes, the vertebrae, the clavicle, the scapula, the iliac crest, the sacrum, and the vertebrae plus ribs. In this view, we can see on the anterior side the clavicle, the ribs, the sternum, the xiphoid process, the manubrium, sternal angle or sternomanubrial joint, jugular notch, and costal cartilage, the vertebrae, the hip bones on both sides, and the symphysis pubis on the anterior side. Important body landmarks are the C7 and base of the neck. The C7 makes the base of the neck, and T2 is in alignment with the superior angle of the scapula, while the spine of scapula is in alignment with T4, and the inferior angle of scapula is in alignment with T7. Similarly, the 12th rib is in alignment with T12 spinous process, and iliac crest is in alignment with the spinous process of lumbar vertebra 4. Over here, you can see the manubrium sterni and the jugular notch. Then you can see the sternomanubrial angle or sternomanubrial joint, the sternum, the body of the sternum, and then the xiphoid process. The spinous processes, they become very prominent if a person is a bit flexed, and they become hard to palpate if you're extended or if your spine is extended. because there is a natural gapping in between the spinous processes when a person tries to flex. Here you can see that the spinous processes, they make a bump, ditch and bump. So this is the bump, there's a ditch and again bump, bump, ditch, bump feeling in the posterior or central part of the posterior part of the spine. This gap, it increases in the lower region. As you progress from the cervical to the lumbar region, you will feel that the spinous processes, they are becoming larger and larger, and the space between them is also getting more and more. So the largest spinous processes will be of the lumbar spine, and interspinous distance will also be more in the lumbar spine as compared to the rest of the regions. There is also one trick to remember, that in the thoracic spine, the spinous process comes below. So it comes below two segments. Like for example, if I am palpating the spinous process of T4, it means that in front of T4, there will be the vertebral body of T5 and T6. So at least one or maximum two vertebra below. The spinous process is inclined inferiorly. So please remember, I repeat it again, that whenever you want to palpate for the thoracic spinous processes, they are inclined towards the lumbar spine. So this is the reason that if you are palpating the spinous process of T4 or T5, so in front of that spinous processes will be the vertebral body of the lower segment. Like on T5 spinous process, there will be the vertebral body of T6. Then this is a very important landmark for physical therapists, because lumbar spine is very notorious, I must say, for low back pain. So the most common type of pain that is experienced by the mankind is low back pain. About 85% of the world population uh, experiences low back pain at least once in their life. So it gives you a fair estimation of where you are. So right from the iliac crest, if you move towards midline, there will be the spinous process of lumbar vertebra 4. Then T12 and the 12th rib. The 12th rib, the 11th and 12th ribs are called the floating ribs, and they are also inclined inferiorly. So when you move your thumbs onto the ribs and in the midline, then you will find the spinous process of T12, the thoracic vertebra 12. So if you want to find out or palpate the lumbar region, it is very technical, that you first need to find out the spinous process of T12 and then L4. In between these will be L1, 2 and 3, and there is also a very good chance that if you position your patient into the side lying position, there is a grip called as the piano grip. So you need to spread your fingers just like piano, and you need to place, let's say for example, your index on L1, then your middle on L2, your ring finger on L3, and your little finger on L4. And if you passively flex the patient's spine, let's say in side lying, just similar to knee to chest, then you can feel the spinous processes moving, and you can also feel the space between the spinous processes getting increased. Then T7 and the inferior angle. Most of the time, the T7 will be in alignment with the inferior angle of scapula, while the T2 will be in alignment with the superior angle of scapula, and the spine of scapula will be in alignment with T4 spinous process. So the T7 vertebra, the C7 vertebra is very important, because it is also called the vertebra prominens, and it has the longest spinous process in most of the population. But there is also one exception to it, that a few people might have uh, the vertebra prominence being T1. So in some people, T1 can be the most prominent vertebra. So how we differentiate between C7 and T1 is just with the help of a movement. If you ask your client or partner to keep on moving, and if that most prominent spinous process moves, if it is mobile, then it is assumed that it will be C7, and if it is fixed, then it will be assumed that this is T1, because T1 is more of fixed as compared to C7, and C7 is mobile as compared to T1. So C7 makes the base of the neck, and this position is really very important because before you manipulate or before you assess the facets, uh, you need to ask your partner to lie supine, and then you can palpate or feel for the structures. There are very important landmarks. Let's say this is the mastoid process. So if you look over here, just under the mastoid process all the way straight to the first rib, if you slide your fingers or if you slide your thumb, you can feel for the transverse processes or the facets of the cervical vertebrae. Although they are not the superficial structure, they become very deep to the soft tissues, but still you can find the hard transverse processes and the facets of the cervical vertebra. Then in the midline you can find the first spinous process being C2, and then onward C3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. So it is worth remembering that the first spinous process that you can find will be the C2, because C1 does not possess any spinous process. So again I must repeat, the first spinous process that you feel in the cervical spine will be C2, and then you can move downward on each spinous processes till you reach C7. Now over here you can see the therapist is trying to palpate for different spinous processes of the spine, the C2, C3, C4, C5, C6 and C7. What you can do is you can passively flex and extend the cervical spine of your partner and patient, and then you can feel the spinous processes moving apart and getting approximated with flexion and extension. Over here, this is another view which shows you that the C1 does not have any spinous process and it runs very deep. So it is almost impossible to access C1 from the central part of the posterior neck. But if you want to palpate the transverse processes of C1, you can immediately find these processes just below the earlobe. So just below the earlobe, the first bony prominence that you feel will be the spinous process, the transverse processes of C1 and then C2. So the transverse processes lies superficial to the facets. So below the or deep to the transverse processes, you will find the facets. And on the transverse processes of the cervical vertebrae is a foramen that you can clearly see over here. This is called the foramen transverse area, and the vertebral artery, it passes through these foramens. In this picture, you're also looking at the same transverse processes of the cervical vertebrae, and deep to the transverse processes, the facets of the cervical spine. Over here, you can see the therapist is trying to move in the midline below from the mastoid process towards the base of the neck, and deep to the muscles you can find the transverse processes. So these are also bumpy areas that you will find bony prominence or hard area, then soft area, hard area, soft area. So you'll keep on rocking between hard and soft areas. Again, this is another view. The neck is a bit rotated just to show you the more clear presentation of the transverse processes and the facets. The transverse processes of the thoracic and lumbar vertebrae are relatively easy to palpate, because first of all you need to you need to find out a very simple rule that in the thoracic spine, there are a lot of joints, and the ribs they attach to the transverse processes, making the costotransverse joint. Now, this costotransverse joint, it lies deep to the uh, erector spinae group of muscles, but it is yet very palpable. There is a simple rule. First, in the midline, you want to find out the spinous processes, which you can easily find. One thumb apart, you will find the lamina. So this is the lamina. So one thumb apart is the lamina, two thumb apart is the transverse processes, and three thumb apart are the, or three fingers apart are the costotransverse joints. So this is very easy to understand. On the middle portion, you will be having the spinous processes. On the second finger, right or left, either, you will find the facets or the lamina. On the third finger, you will find the transverse processes. So here you can see with the middle finger, the therapist is trying to palpate the spinous processes and then the transverse processes. And again, if you palpate the costotransverse joint, it will be uh, a, a bump and a ditch. So simple bump and a ditch. So one elevation and one depression. The lumbar vertebrae are the largest vertebrae, hence they have the largest transverse processes, but they are also covered with a lot of muscular tissue, but still you can approach the transverse processes of the lumbar vertebra from the posterior side if if your partner is lying on prone position and on their stomach. When they are on their stomach, you can easily palpate for the transverse processes. And again, there are different strategies. Either you move from the midline to the periphery or from the lateral to the midline. Then here is another depiction that how from the iliac crest you can move towards the transverse process. The lamina groove of the thoracic and lumbar vertebra. So these are filled with the layers of erector spinae and transversospinalis muscles. So the lamina are one thumb or one finger apart from the spinous processes, and this is the area where the facets are. So this is the very same reason that the contact is made to this area when you want to manipulate the facets. Over here you can see some soft tissues, they are filling the lamina. So this whole area is filled with the muscle tissue. So there are different muscles that we are going to name. Then we can move to the front, and first you can find the xiphoid process, and from the xiphoid process, if you move up, you will find the body of the sternum or the sternum itself, and then from top between the clavicles you will find the jugular notch, and the sternomanubrial angle is a bit protruded part of this region, so we call it as the sternocostal angle or sternomanubrial angle, and it is the site where the second rib is attached. And you can also see and feel for the uh, costal cartilages in the upper region, and if you come to the lower region, like on the lower ribs, these costal cartilages they become very extended and long, and hence there will be more mobility of the thoracic region or the rib cage on the lower aspect as compared to the upper aspect. Here you can see the therapist is trying to palpate for the ribs and the costal cartilages. Again, I must say the costal cartilages are very larger as compared to the upper part. So in upper ribs, the costal cartilages are very small as compared to the lower ribs. In this picture, what you are looking at is the sternal angle. It lies in alignment with T4. The jugular notch lies in alignment with T2, and similarly, if you look at the xiphoid process, it comes in directly anterior to the T10. The floating ribs are easily palpable on the posterior side. The partner is in prone position. A bolster is placed just onto the anterior to the ankle joints, just to make the pelvis and the muscles relax. And because the pelvis has a lot of influence on the lumbar spine, there's a rhythm called as the lumbopelvic rhythm. So it's a very basic concept, and I expect you to know this for sure. So the ribs, the floating ribs, the 11th and 12th ribs, they are very easily palpable and they're very soft, but try not to press too hard, because this can sometimes be very painful because of close proximity to the viscerals. Muscles of the spine. This is the dorsal view of the spine, and if you recall, we have already discussed all these muscles from the upper extremity and from the shoulder region. We are also trying to see the same muscles again, but we'll just name them and we'll not go into that detail. So the upper trapezius, the middle trapezius, the lower trapezius, the latissimus dorsi, these are the broadest and longest muscles. And then if you see, you can see the external oblique, the internal oblique, then you can see the serratus posterior muscle, the erector spinae group of muscles, and these are again the shoulder muscles. These are deep muscles that we have not discussed yet, but we'll discuss them now. This is the transverse abdominis. So transversus abdominis muscle is this muscle which is present on the lateral aspect, and then we have external oblique and internal oblique running over the transversus abdominis. Then if you look at, these are the muscles collectively called as the erector spinae group of muscles. If you look at this muscle, this is called the iliocostalis, because it originates from the IM and it goes all the way up to the ribs, so it is called as the iliocostalis. It has different names like iliocostalis lumborum, iliocostalis thoracis, and iliocostalis cervicus, so all the way up. Then you have longissimus, longissimus coli or longissimus thoracis, so all these muscles. Then you have the spinalis thoracis. So these are three muscles that you should remember, that longissimus is one, then spinalis is other, and iliocostalis is the one. On the lateral view, you can see the external oblique and the serratus anterior muscle contributing to the rib cage, and the serratus posterior muscle, but the serratus posterior muscle is not very palpable. Instead, the quadratus lumborum can be palpable and serratus anterior, while external, internal, oblique, and even some part of transversus abdominis can be palpable. In this picture, you can clearly see the small muscles. The deepest muscle of the spine are called as the rotators. Then you can see the multifidus. Multifidus is the second most deepest muscle, and then you can see the spinalis. Sometime it is called the semispinalis and the spinalis, because semispinalis runs between the transverse process and the spines process, and the spinalis only runs between the spines processes. Then you have longissimus and iliocostalis. So the most lateral muscle is the iliocostalis. Then if you come medial, longissimus, and then deep to the longissimus is the semispinalis or spinalis, multifidus, and rotators. So unfortunately, you cannot clearly find uh, the deepest muscle. It is yet easy to understand and to palpate the iliocostalis and longissimus. And please remember the fact that if you are working on the costotransverse area, so if you are palpating the costotransverse area, these muscles will be the longissimus, either the thoracis or the cervicus. Then if you move lateral, you will find the iliocostalis, and they will be a bit thinner as compared to the longissimus. And there are three longissimus, two iliocostalis, then one semispinalis, one spinalis, one multifidus, and one rotators. Over here you can see the arrangement of the muscles, how they are arranged. In the cervical region, you can see these muscles as if you look over here, these are called as the splenius cervicus muscles. Then levator scapulae has been cut down, the splenius capitis, then the semispinalis, and the rest of the muscles are cut. Over here, again, the small rotators can be seen, the semispinalis can be seen, the rest of the muscles are cut, but the longissimus capitis, and these are the deep cervical muscles which are very hard to palpate. These are the occipital muscles, and these are the deepest layers of the muscles. Over here you can see the rectus capitis posterior major, the rectus capitis posterior minor, semispinalis has been cut, oblique capitis superior, oblique capitis inferior. So these are very deep muscles, and there is a very interesting fact about these muscles. Now we'll talk about the synergists. For trunk flexion, all these muscles, the rectus abdominis, the chief contributor, whereas external oblique, internal oblique, psoas major, and iliacus are also working to bring the trunk into flexion. Extensors, a lot of muscles, because we learn to keep our spine erected all the time and extended all the time, and for this very same reason we need muscles. There are again two classification of the muscles that you can find in a lot of books, either called as the global muscles and the local muscles. The local muscles are the small muscles, and they provide stability to the spine, like the spinalis, like the semispinalis, like the multifidus, like the rotators. All these muscles are the called local muscles, and they provide stability to the spine, while the iliocostalis or the longissimus, these muscles, they provide movement to the spine. So please remember the fact, instead of providing much of stability, these muscles are providing more torque. So the movement is uh, created more by these muscles. Then over here you can see the rotation. So external, internal oblique, one on each side, multifidus and rotators. Again, you can see how these muscles, they contribute in these movements. For side bending or lateral flexion, iliocostalis, external internal oblique, longissimus, quadratus lumborum, psoas major, intertransverse array, and some other muscles. For the elevation and depression, there are more muscles involved in elevation as compared to depression, because depression is assisted by gravity. So that is the reason that we need a lot of muscles to help in elevation. Then the rectus spinae group of muscles are the spinalis, the longissimus, and iliocostalis. Here you can see the most lateral are the iliocostalis, then medial to them are the longissimus, and then medial to them are the multifidus and other group of muscles. So if you move your fingers, let's say 4 to 5 fingers away from the spinous processes, then you can find these muscles, the most lateral being iliocostalis, then medial to them the longissimus, and then medial to them will be the small muscles. Here you can see how these muscles, and you can also strum your thumbs. So these muscles, they make two mountains. So it is also called as two mountains and a valley, because on either side the rectus spinae group of muscles, they make two mountains, one on each side, and a depressed area or a depression is basically the part where the spinous processes lies. So hence it is called as two mountains and a valley. Then these are the very deepest muscle, the transversus spinalis. So you can just have a fair idea about their location, but you cannot directly palpate these muscles. Again, these are the small muscles, and you can see their position. These are the rotators. Splenius capitis and splenius cervicus. Well, some part of the splenius can be palpated. Over here you can see the splenius capitis, so it lies superior to the the levator scapulae muscle. So this arrangement is very true, and there is just this margin between the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid and the anterior border of the upper trapezius. You will find the topmost muscle being the splenius capitis and then levator scapulae. And there's a trick to differentiate between these two, and that is if you resist the elevation of the shoulder, then the levator scapulae will be engaged. But if you resist the side bending, then the splenius capitis will be engaged, and this will be more taut as compared to the rest of the muscles. So here you can see just lateral to the fibers of the upper trapezius. Upper trapezius can be differentiated from the splenius capitis. If you want to find out the fibers or differentiate between the fibers of upper trapezius and splenius, so you need to ask your partner to extend, and you need to resist or to perform an isometric contraction in extension. So you need to resist extension, and then you will find the tensing fibers of the upper trapezius, while for side bending your splenius capitis will become more prominent. And you can also rotate the head to make it more tensed. Suboccipital muscles, we were talking about these muscles. These are very small muscles, and uh, because they lie very deep to a lot of structures, so it is not directly possible to contact them directly. But yes, again you can have a fair idea about their location and if there is any pathology. And these muscles are, again, I must say, I must use the word notorious. These are very notorious muscles because they contribute to a very important clinical condition, and that is diagnosed falsely, and that is called as the CGH, or the cervicogenic headache, in about 35% of the all the headache patients. So they have cervicogenic headache, and 35% is not a minor percentage. Here you can see researchers have discovered that the rectus capitis posterior minor, it attaches not only to the occiput but also to the dura mater. So there is a direct connection between the rectus capitis and the dura. So if this muscle become tight or taut, or if this muscle has spasm in it, it pulls the dura mater. So if the dura mater is pulled, it means that the flow of the CSF can be obstructed or the flow of the CSF can be hindered. So with altered mechanisms, it can produce the cervicogenic headaches. So this is the connective tissue that surrounds the spinal cord and brain, and because of this connection between the rectus capitis, posterior minor, and the dura mater, this muscle may cause headaches by disrupting the normal cerebrospinal fluid fluctuations and hence functioning of the vertebral artery and suboccipital nerve. So in a lot of patients who might have dizziness, who might have complaints of nausea or vomiting or some other complaints, so there are fair chances that this small single muscle can be taut, and it is exerting some pressure onto the dura, and in return all the symptoms are coming on the patient. Then we have a muscle called as the quadratus lumborum. It is a very important muscle, again in side bending, as well as if there is a trigger point in this region, it can mimic low back pain, and it also can get referred to the anterior aspect of thigh and sometimes the posterior. So this is the original insertion area, and it is a lateral muscle, one on each side. If you look at how this muscle is sandwiched, so you can see the transverse processes, the inferior border of the floating ribs, and then the iliac crest. So this is the quadratus lumborum muscle, and you can easily palpate it in the prone lying or even in the side lying position. Then we have abdominal muscles, the rectus abdominis, external oblique, internal oblique, and transversus abdominis. There are a lot of studies that pay emphasis to the role of transversus abdominis, and I will tell you why. Because transversus abdominis plays a very vital role in maintaining the stability of the spine. So if you ever encounter a patient having a problem with the core muscles or weak core muscles or weak spine, the transversus abdominis muscles need to be trained for stability. So here you can see the external oblique. The internal oblique is deep to this, then the abdominal aponeurosis, the rectus abdominis on the anterior side, and the linea alba can also be seen. Here you can see that this is the orientation of muscles: external oblique, internal oblique, rectus abdominis, and this is the transverse abdominis. So the transverse abdominis, it creates tension from right to left. So here you can see, so the organs of the thorax are protected by the rib cage, while the viscera of the lower thorax rely on four abdominal muscles for support and protection. The four abdominal muscles, they wrap the entire abdomen in vertical. This is the vertical direction, and then the horizontal direction. These are the horizontal directions. Then the diagonal directions. These are the diagonal directions. In the same way, packing tape is wrapped around a bag going for a long journey. So if people normally try to train their external oblique, internal oblique, but they forget to train their transversus abdominis, and transversus abdominis plays a very important role in the stability of not only the core, the lumbar. So the core is the area that is between the respiratory diaphragm and the urogenital diaphragm. Okay, so it does not only play an important role in the core of the body, but also it plays a very important role in the sacroiliac joint stability as well. So here you can see the rectus abdominis. These are the external oblique, the fibers of internal oblique, and the transverse abdominis can be seen. There is a small muscle called as pyramidalis. It can be absent in about 20% of the population. It tenses the linea alba. The only function is this, and it lies deep to this umbilicus, very deep to the umbilicus, below umbilicus. Just you can say it is attached to the symphysis pubis. Rectus abdominis can be palpated very easily if you ask your partner or patient to lie supine and then try to flex or try to raise up. This is the most anterior part of your tummy, and it becomes tensed, and this becomes very taut in the midline, and that is the region where the rectus abdominis is. For external oblique, if you want to palpate the external oblique, you ask your partner to rotate his trunk towards the opposite side. For example, if you are trying to palpate the left external oblique, you ask them to perform right rotation. So there is a exercise called as the Russian twist. So it is very similar to the Russian twist onto the opposite side. So you can feel the tensing external oblique fibers. Then the diaphragm is the muscle of respiration, and this is the primary muscles of respiration. Basically, it is responsible for inspiration only. When it becomes contracted, the anterior-posterior diameter of the rib cage increases, and thus there's a negative pressure, and it forces the air to rush in. So there is a condition called as hiccup, and this is due to an involuntary contraction of the diaphragm that that causes the air to rush into the lungs and the vocal cords to snap shut. So hence it is called a hiccup. There is a particular sound with this opening and closing. The diaphragm can be palpated, and it is because this is a deep structure and it is in close proximity to the liver. So you need to be very gentle while trying to palpate for the diaphragm. So first of all, you need to locate the inferior edge of the rib cage, which is lateral to the xiphoid process. Then you lay your thumb pads just inferior to the ribs on the abdomen and ask your partner to take slow deep breaths. With every exhalation, you try to go deep and deep and deep. So with inspiration and expiration, you go deep and deep till you feel the diaphragm. Over here you can see that first you need to find out the costal margins, and then you ask your partner to take a few normal breaths and then deep breaths. With every exhalation you keep on pressing more and more and more, but this is not A vertical pressure, it is rather an oblique pressure, and you just want to slide your thumbs underneath these costal margins. So here you can see, so you're not pressing towards the liver, rather you are pressing on superior, part of the liver, or just superior to liver. This can also be palpated on either sides, but preferably on right side. This is more of comfortable as compared to left side, and you can ask your partner to go into sideline position just to assist with the, because the organs, they tend to fall in response to gravity, and then they can be uh, a bit ease while trying to palpate for the diaphragm. The heart is directly affected by the motions of the diaphragm. So as the heart fibrous pericardium is attached to the diaphragm central tendon by the ligaments, the heart literally rides up and down on the diaphragm as you breathe. So the yogis were right that breathing can massage the heart, and there are techniques that work on the diaphragm. They improve the mobility of the diaphragm, and they can help your patients internal mechanisms. They can also affect the cardiac output, and they can affect, and that techniques are called the visceral manipulation. There's a lot uh, whole course about visceral manipulation by Jane Piré-Barrel. Then the intercostal muscles are sandwiched between the ribs, and they are very readily accessible because there can be external and internal intercostal muscles. It's good to remember that the external intercostal muscles are more lateral and internal intercostal muscles are more medially oriented, and you can clearly try to feel for the soft tissue between the ribs. Here you can see the fingers just like on the piano keys. So just like piano keys, you can place your fingers onto the soft tissues, and you can find for the intercostal muscles, and these are the muscles that get activated when somebody's uh, taking breath. Then the serratus posterior, superior and inferior, we have two serratus, posterior, superior and inferior. These are deep muscles, so they become a bit difficult to palpate, but with some practice and with some time, you can still differentiate between the quadratus lumborum and the serratus posterior muscle. These are the deep muscles, intertransverse serae muscles, and small muscles absolutely not needed to palpate for any pathology, because if there is some sort of pathology, as these muscles are small muscles, they can easily be affected with certain maneuvers like stretching and like manipulation and things like that. Similar to the small muscles, we have interspinalis muscle. Like intertransverse serae, we have interspinalis muscles. These muscles are again the small muscles, and they contribute very little to none in moving the spine. Then we have ligamentum nuchae. This is the broadest ligament, and it is the continuation of the supraspinous ligament. It becomes broadest in the cervical region, and it gets taut when a person flexes the neck. So with alternatively flexion and extension of the neck, you can feel the tensing and relaxing ligamentum nuchae in the midline or just over the spinous processes. Here you can see the ligamentum nuchae being tensed. The supraspinous ligament is present on whole of the spinous processes of the spine, and you can feel for the supraspinous ligament with a bit of flexion and extension. If the patient is moving, or if the partner is moving into flexion and extension, you can easily feel. So this is the space where uh, you find the interspinous space, and you can easily palpate the supraspinous ligament in that particular region, and deep to that will be interspinous ligament. Then abdominal aorta, it must be directly underneath, or at least in the vicinity of about 2 inches from the umbilicus. So if you place your finger or thumb onto the umbilicus, then it should be in between the 2 inches area uh, around the umbilicus, and it lies deep. If you want to palpate, again, just see how the therapist is trying to palpate for the abdominal aorta. You need to place the contact hand just over the umbilicus or adjacent to the umbilicus, and then you need to press with the other hand. The reinforcement hand helps, and with every single breath, with every exhalation, you go deep, deep, and deep till you feel the pulsation. This is the reference book, and now we'll move towards the question and answer sessions. Thank you very much.